I'm here on the job site with Dale, who's a framing contractor.
Hey, good morning.
Dale traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for all his business vehicles. We're here where he needs us most.
Yep, they sure are.
We make it easy for him to save on all his insurance needs, all in one place, with coverage that fits his business and bottom line. Oh, I shouldn't have looked down.
It's all right.
We're so far up here.
Look at me. Take a deep breath.
No, I'm good. So good.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
Yay, Media Group. A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter, and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. Today, we are diving into a topic that feels like the ultimate blend of cutting-edge science and just real life wellness. We're talking about biological age testing. So we all know about chronological age. That's the number of birthdays we celebrated, how old we are in terms of years. But what if that number doesn't actually reflect how your body is aging? It may, but it may be off. It may be way off. And this is where our biological age comes in. It's a game changer in how we can start to view and start to think about our health, especially our longevity, how we're living those potential extra years that we have, and how we can really tailor our lifestyle for better aging. I recently took a biological age test myself through a company called TruDiagnostic. They have the True Age test, as that was the specific one that I did, and it reports out on just so many insights on how our body is aging. The True Age report, it calls together 3 different types of biological age tests. One that is vetted out with Harvard, the other with Duke, the third with Yale. It gives a lot of insight into how our body is aging compared to, again, those chronological years. I still have so many questions about what these numbers mean. As I'm flipping through the report, it's fascinating, but there's still so much that I really want to have a better understanding of. So I'm excited to have Dr. Matt Dawson, CEO and co-founder of TruDiagnostic, joining us today. And with him, we'll be breaking down, what does biological age really mean? How is it different from chronological age? How do we know which tests are legitimate? What are the questions to ask, whether we're looking at something like True Age or other tests? What are the questions that we want to ask so that we know and we can have a good grasp of, is this a legitimate test? Is this something that can be repeatable? Is it reliable? Is it accurate? Also, how to interpret these tests. What can these tests really tell us about our health long-term? And even looking at, what does it tell us about a snapshot of really how we're doing now, how the lifestyle decisions we're making, how are they impacting the rate at which our body is aging? Dr. Dawson is a medical doctor. He's a physician. He's also an expert in the field of epigenetics and biological aging. So welcome, Dr. Dawson. I'm grateful for you carving out the time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So you're a physician, you're an MD, and you practiced traditional medicine for a bit, and then you made that transition to functional medicine and to what you refer to as precision medicine. So tell us a little bit about that before we even get into True Age and the testing that I did.
Sure, yeah. So I was in the traditional system, and I became pretty disillusioned with it pretty quickly, just seeing that people aren't getting better. It's not working. And as I was having this realization, it was about 6 years ago, I started seeing all this science emerging around genomics and precision medicine. And it looked to me like, for the first time, we could actually tailor pretty much every treatment and lifestyle intervention down to the level of the DNA for individuals. And so my co-founder of Wild Health, the precision medicine company, Mike Mallon and I, we started digging into this. We went down a rabbit hole. We sequenced our own DNA. And as we were going through this, Mike had a really difficult issue with his lipids. They were just through the roof, like a dangerously high level. He saw his doctor. His doctor put him on a specific diet that works for most people. He got worse because he's not most people. His doctor wanted them to put him on a statin, which, okay, it works for a lot of people. But when he went on it, he had myopathy, muscle breakdown, didn't tolerate it at all. And as he's going through all this, we were looking at his genetics, and we saw that he had all of these genes that made him probably need to be on the opposite diet of his doctor recommended. And he had a very specific gene that made him pretty much guaranteed to have that muscle breakdown and myopathy. And we were irritated, kind of angry, like, why did he have to go through this? And then we remembered that, yeah, medicine is always 10 to 15 years behind. And his doctor's not doing this, but no one was doing it.
And they didn't have the visibility that you guys had in this, right?
That's right. Yeah. And so we left the university. We started doing it for others, and we've seen thousands of patients through this approach where we sequence DNA, blood work, microbiome, all these different factors, and give precision medicine recommendations.
And so through that, the TruAge testing and TruDiagnostic was born. And I've been really intrigued about the concept of, biological age versus chronological age. So just even starting there, because when we talk about what are our biological age markers, first, what's the difference with biological versus chronological?
Yeah, and just to take a step back, technically that's not where the biological age testing and TruAge came from. So that was a company called Wild Health that did precision medicine only, so DNA sequencing. And so when we sequence your DNA, that's like your human operating system, that's your genetics. But that's only leads to about 20% of your health outcome. The other 80% are epigenetics. And that's what TruAge and biologic age testing is looking at, is epigenetics, how you're expressing those genes. So the TruAge test and biologic age testing, at least the ones that we do at TruDiagnostic, are based on looking at about 1 million different genes and how much each one of those are turned up and turned down. And that's how we get the biologic age scores that we report on.
And share what epigenetics is. I think people are comfortable with genetics because we can kind of have a frame of reference for that. But just for our listeners, how do you explain epigenetics?
Yeah. So genetics is kind of your potential. We'll call that your human potential, what you're predisposed to. That doesn't change. But your actual health outcome, what diseases you get, how you feel and perform, that's based on epigenetics and how you express those genes. So everything you do, what you eat, how you sleep, what you're exposed to, your stress levels, all of those things are turning genes up and down that you already have. And that's epigenetics. And you can control that. And again, that accounts for about 80% of your health outcome. Like DNA is not destiny. People have said that term, DNA is destiny. It's not. Like, you have control over it. And that is epigenetics.
So it's not changing up our DNA sequence. It's not altering that, but it is how our lifestyle, our environment, and other factors are affecting how these genes are expressed.
That's exactly right. So I'll give you an example. One of our first patients at Wild Health was my mother. So my grandmother had died of dementia and Alzheimer's. And anyone who's had a family member go through that, it's a horrible disease. So when I looked at my mother's DNA, she had an ApoE4 gene. And ApoE4, some of the listeners may be familiar, is it predisposes you to dementia, and it makes you 300% more likely to get dementia. So my mother had that. However, what I told her is, Mom, this is not bad news. This is good news, because we know how to affect that through epigenetics, through what you do. So then we designed this perfect plan for her based on her DNA and blood work. What are superfoods for her? What are kryptonite foods? How she's going to exercise for her genetics. And in 3 months, she lost 40 pounds, reversed her insulin resistance, and told me that she felt 20 years younger. So that's epigenetics, doing things different in your lifestyle to affect that gene expression. And now we've greatly lowered her risk of getting dementia, even though she has that genetic marker for it.
So like you said, our DNA is not our destiny. It's our core, it's our foundation. And then there's so much of what our lifestyle and our choices are that's going to really influence those epigenetics. And so then you're using, tell us how the TruAge test works and what we're looking at when we talk about like biological aging versus our chronological age.
Yeah. So I said that my mother told me she felt 20 years younger. Well, when she said that, one of the things I thought is, Mom, chronologically, you're 3 months older, but actually biologically, you probably are younger. Like we have really extended her life through those interventions. So that's what the biologic age tests measure. And it's measuring. And the reason why it's important is because age is the number one risk factor for every disease. It's a much bigger risk factor than obesity, smoking, alcohol. It is the number one risk factor. And so if we have a way to measure that and follow that over time, it's also a really great integrator of your health. Like we will dial, Wild Health will dial in and we'll look at your A1C and your CRP and your triglycerides and all these individual markers. But your biologic age is a really nice global marker for how your system is doing in general. So we like to follow that with our patients and see what the rate of aging and biologic age is over time. Make sure we're doing a good job globally, not just with individual markers.
And we'll talk in more in a bit, but when I did the True Age test and I was really excited to get the results. And my chronological age is 49 and a half. I'll tell you, I'm turning 50 in January, and the cover page of it had 50. It rounded up, I suppose. I was like, it was the first time that I've seen the 5 in front of it. I was like, oh my, this is happening. I don't have an issue with turning 50, and I'm like, it's fine. But it was different seeing that number written, age 50. I was like, wait, not yet. But 49 and a half is my chronological age, and then right at 4 years younger is my biological age. I felt like that was okay, and that was in one of them. But you can walk us through what each of these are, and I shared my results with Dr. Dawson so that he sees it. And I thought, well, that's at least a good thing. But then there was so much more in this report that we'll look at. But just for listeners, calendar years, I'm 49 and a half. How is my body aging? It's perceiving by that particular set of markers at 45 and a half, which is a good thing. When we talk about the different markers, I'm excited to talk with you about the different test results. So in the True Age test that I did, there's 3 different kind of clusters of reports that we get back. And that's, Dr. Dawson will walk us through that. But as I even had been researching for biological age markers, this is something that I've been wanting to learn more about and explore this more deeply. I've seen, and I would, search NIH and what are some of the different, key markers. And some of the reports that I was running across, they were just ordinary, typical markers of inflammation or lipid profile, things that we would maybe normally have. And they didn't seem like it was anything different.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in what are the kind of the different clusters of markers? What are you guys using with TruDiagnostics, and how do we come up with these? And why is there not a standardized, here's what we would turn to? Let's take a minute to talk about Orgain, our sponsor for this week's episode. I am all about reaching for food and drink that give us that steady energy versus those blood sugar highs and lows. Looking for things that are going to keep us feeling fuller longer, optimizing our energy for both our body and our mind. And protein is a key element of this conversation, and we can get it through whole foods, but incorporating a protein powder or a ready-to-drink protein shake can also just make it easier to reach our protein goals. Orgain is one of those trusted brands that has been a go-to for me for years. They have a team of dietitians on staff, and they have a line of plant-based protein powders that we love. We use these in our smoothies, our coffee drinks. I also really like Orgain's grass-fed whey protein, and they have really great collagen peptides. My husband always keeps Orgain ready-to-drink protein shakes on hand. He keeps them at work, at home, in his gym bag. He especially loves their new 30-gram protein drink. They're perfect for him. There is only 1 gram of sugar with the 30 grams of protein. They're a great source of electrolytes as well, much more than you'd find in many sports drinks. Orgain is convenient, giving us real nutrition, no artificial flavors, no artificial sweeteners. Orgain 30-gram protein shakes are available at Costco, also Orgain.com. If you want to get in on the delicious protein-packed nutrition today, head to Orgain.com/fueled20. Use promo code fueled20 for 20% off your order. Again, that's Orgain, Orgain.com/fueled20 for 20% off. Make sure you use our promo code fueled20 so they know you heard it here.
Yeah, it's a very important question. And even the omic age that we talked about, the biologic age, is not the one that I would look at for you, like if I was talking to you as my patient. So there are probably 100 different quote unquote biological age tests out there. A lot of them will use phenotypic markers like you described, like just regular blood biomarkers. You put a bunch in and do a calculation. There's an infinite number of these that people create. However, we only report on three. One that was developed by Harvard, one developed by Duke, and one developed by Yale. And when I think about biologic age tests, even 2 years ago, I wasn't excited about them at all. In fact, I thought it was more of a gimmick. And like if someone, even if they did come back to their biologic age, if they're chronologically 40 and the biologic age is 44 or 36, what do I care? I'm just going to kind of try to optimize them in general. Also, a lot of the older ones, you send the same test twice in one day and it may come back 4 or 5 years difference. There's not enough precision there. So for a biologic age test to be useful, it has to have a few key features, and it's why we chose the three we did. It needs to be able to predict death better than your chronologic age, because most people know their chronologic age. It's if they don't, they can look at their driver's license and see their birthday there. So it needs to be better than that. A lot of the old ones weren't. It also needs to be precise. So if you send it twice in a day, it needs to come back with really tight, what's called intra-class correlation. And most of them weren't. They would come back 4 to 5 years difference just randomly. And they also have to be proven to respond to interventions that we know decrease aging, like caloric restriction or things like that. So that's what these three do. And I'll just quickly go over them. The one that you just mentioned, just gave you a number, is omic image. This was developed by Harvard. They have a 100,000 patient biobank. And it has been shown to be the biologic age test that is best at predicting your mortality when you're going to die. So for someone your age, you're doing great. You're doing about 10% better at 45 instead of chronologically 49 and a half. I was going to say 50, but I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not going to round up. I'm sure 49. So that's what the omic image is for. The one that there's another one called Symphony Age. This was developed by Yale. And why we like it is it actually gives ages of your different organ system, because you age in a heterogeneous way. Your brain may not be aging the same rate as your heart. Someone that dies of cardiovascular disease had a faster aging heart. Someone that dies of dementia had a faster aging brain. So this allows us to kind of find the weakest link in the chain, what we need to kind of focus on and do more blood testing around and see how we can optimize. And then my favorite one, the one that I use with patients the most, is called the Dunedin Pace. So if you were just going to think about one and look at one, it would be this. So this one was developed by Duke. And what it does, it doesn't give you an age, it gives you your rate of aging. So it'll give you on a scale from like 0.6 to 1.4. If you get a 1.0, you're aging at the normal rate. If it's lower, you're aging more slowly, which is what you want. The reason I love this test is because it's been shown to be very responsive to interventions. For example, if you get pregnant, that's a physiologic stress and your rate of aging goes up 20%. When you deliver the baby, it comes back down. If you get hip surgery, car accident, get COVID, your rate of aging goes up and it comes back down. So this allows us to do experiments. Like if someone wanted to change their diet or do IV stem cells in Panama, we could look at this before and after. And in fact, Stanford just did a twin study. It was a Netflix documentary people may have seen, looking at omnivore versus vegan diets and doing this. And they found in 8 weeks, just changing your diet, it changed your rate of aging. So it allows people to follow over time if they want to try a new intervention or something and see how their pace of aging changes.
I would imagine, I think about a time, several years back, my mom was in the hospital for a year and it was just a game changer, life changer for all of us. And I remember I would look in the mirror and I would, wow. And even my stepdad, when all of that was finally behind us, it was as if 2 decades had been shaved from him, because he had been under such stress that when that stress went away, it was like, oh, wow. So I would be so interested. And I would imagine that these intensely stressful times that some people might be going through, also emotional stress would also raise that, my guess.
100%. And we can see this in your report even, Molly. So if you look at, for example, the omic image, your biologic age was 10% lower than what should be, kind of the 49.5 to 45.5. So 10% better. So that's good. The reason why I don't put a ton of stock in that is because what if you did have a period in your life where maybe in your 20s you weren't living a healthy lifestyle, or you went through this really stressful period with your mother that was going to accelerate your aging? Well, I can't do anything about that. So what's going on right now? What is your pace of aging? And if you look at this, your pace of aging is almost 20% slower than normal, but your omic age is about 10%. So that tells me that what you're doing right now is much better than the average of what you've done over your life. And we see this with people all the time that are very health enthusiasts. Maybe they weren't in their 20s or their 30s, and now they're doing it right. And that's what I see in your test. Like, to be almost 20% lower your pace of aging is incredible. That's great. You're doing everything right now.
Well, actually, that does make me feel better hearing that, because even though I was happy to see, 4 years shaved off, that 10% lower, I thought, really? I feel younger than that. I feel that I'm not that I feel younger. That's, again, it's not about the age as the number, but if I were to think, how does my body feel compared to maybe when I felt like in my 30s or other, I wouldn't say that I feel 15 years older. My body doesn't feel 15 years older than it did in my 30s, which is a good thing,
Yeah.
So hearing even that background is super helpful. And so I think there are a lot of just individuals who are listening to this, providers, dietitians, physicians, who I think are sort of what you said right at the beginning, skeptical. And so, we tend to look at things like that through that lens of skepticism. And then when you're looking at a lot of different companies that may say, hey, we culled together this sampling of markers that we're going to put in a package and call this your biological age markers, and send us whatever, blood spot or whatever. And then we're going to analyze this. But when you guys are pulling and using these tests that are developed with Harvard, Yale, Duke, it's not Dr. Dawson that says, hey, I have created this whole, you've said, I've identified these, I find these valid, they're repeatable, they're reliable. We can, for all these different reasons, I see these as being really good tests. And you've pulled these together to make them available to us, the public, to have in one spot, essentially.
Yeah. That's right. We have the exclusive license for dozens of these tests and clocks. These are the only 3 we report. So, like, you're looking in the market at like a biologic age test, they're everywhere. There's so many. Number one, have they published their results? We published 32 papers with Harvard, Duke, Mayo, Johns Hopkins, all these in the last few years. So is the test, is it published? Has it been validated? And then the 3 things that I mentioned earlier, I'll just repeat them again. Does it do a better job at predicting mortality and disease risk than your chronologic age? And these 3 do. Is it precise enough, like repeatable? And then does it respond to intervention? So Yale did a really big study recently looking at that, and these were the 3 that respond to intervention. And that's why we picked these 3 out of the dozens that we could report on, or potentially hundreds that are out there, is because it's very scientific and research back from these big universities.
And so looking at each of these, we won't spend a ton of time, because I do, I would say to our listeners, pull up the website, poke around, look at what's in the TruAge testing. But I do want to talk through my results a little bit. One, selfishly, I want to kind of understand some elements of it. But then 2, for any of our listeners who do choose to do this, you can come back and kind of listen to this and see how would I interpret this for me. So going straight, when we get the report, the first one that shows up is that omic M age that you said, and that's the one that was 45 and a half versus chronological age being 49 and a half. What goes behind this? Like, what is this measuring? What is it looking at to come up with that biological age?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was the one developed by Harvard. They have a 100,000 patient biobank. So they were able to go back and look over time at these patients and how they aged, when they died, and then draw multiple blood samples from the biobank to check to find the epigenetic pattern of different ages. So that's how it was developed and validated. And then once it was developed, it was then tested with other folks in a new cohort, like how good is this at predicting mortality and disease risk, and it performed extremely well. So that's how that one was developed. The other 2 are going to be very similar from Yale and Duke. They're just different because the Yale one looked at individual organ systems. So they would look at someone like with their liver age, what are their AST and LFTs, the AST and ALT, the liver function tests in general, and for their kidney age, what is their BUN and creatinine over time. But the similar thing, large groups of patients, following them over time, and then correlating to this DNA methylation and epigenetic testing.
I'm going to go back to the first one that we looked at, though, the omic M. As I was kind of looking through the data that all comes with it, that's one that it's not just looking at those typical markers we would get from our normal health provider. Like, this is looking at specific methylation patterns at about 1 million locations on our DNA assess. So it's one of those things that for me, it's hard to even wrap our head around what that looks like and what that is.
Yeah.
But in short, it's looking at an element of our DNA that we're typically not going to get in our normal routine blood work. We could say.
Yeah, there's no way you get it. This is a very specific, different thing. Looking at it's called. So we use the word epigenetics. Technically, it's DNA methylation. So we look at those 1 million gene sites and how much is each one methylated, which tells us how much is turned up or turned down. So that's what we're looking at. So this is not something a normal lab would be able to do. And in fact, developing this would not have been really possible 10 years ago, because you just need machine learning and being able to handle that big data and even come up with these algorithms. It's only barely been possible in the last 5 years or so.
And even you, as much as you know the research you've done in this space, it's probably one of those things that takes an organization like Harvard to pull together this. It's something that probably a company that says, hey, we created these factors that we're tracking, it's such a high level that it would be hard for an individual or a small company to really have I would imagine, the level of science and expertise to pull that off.
That's true. And technically, we have a whole team of PhD bioinformaticians on our team. But it's been important to us.
You're like, no, we could have. It just might have taken.
Well, we didn't have the biobank, the 100,000 patient biobank. And it's just also important to us that these are always published and done with universities and academics backing it up too, because we see a lot of companies out there, they have proprietary algorithms. Like, well, what does that mean? Like, how do we test if it's valid or not? So we try to be very open about all of that and publish everything.
And for me, I appreciate that greatly, because there is sort of a murkiness in a lot of it that you would go into sort of blindly, and for the consumer, it can either be misleading, it can end up having, all of it. It could be either information that's maybe not as useful as what they think it is, but they're using this to lead them. So the level of openness, transparency, and also the clarity that you'll have, and then how much it's vetted out, to me is important. On the Symphony Age, as you're looking at the different organ systems, heart, musculoskeletal, blood, et cetera, walk me through what's behind that. What types of markers are being used to come up with what each of these different organ systems and how they're aging?
Yeah, similar thing. So we'll look at a large group of patients, and in those patients, we'll find patients who are aging faster or slower with specific organ systems, like LFTs elevated or hormones out of whack kind of thing. And then we find the epigenetic pattern. So what does that look like at these specific gene sites? Which ones are turned up and which ones are turned down, to then develop that algorithm. And while this doesn't give you like specific, okay, now do this because of this, it does provide more resolution for then you to talk to your physician about. For example, like if your liver age is higher, well, then look at your LFTs and then start talking to your physician about, are there supplements or medications you're taking that are causing this? Are you drinking too much alcohol? What is the cause? It gives you some resolution to then dig into what is going on with whatever the quote unquote weakest link in the chain is.
So on one, like inflammation, are these some of the things that we would see of also some traditional markers like a CRP along with other data points?
For sure. And so if you were my patient, for example, and inflammation marker came back high, well, then we would look at your CRP and other inflammatory markers, but then we start thinking about why. So like at Wild Health, for example, we would have your DNA. and we would look at it, and we may see that you have an SH2B3 polymorphism, which means that wheat is very inflammatory for you. Or you may have an MCM6 polymorphism, meaning that dairy is more inflammatory. So we would actually look at your genes and your other lifestyle factors. What are you eating? What are you exposed to try to identify what is causing the extra inflammation. Or you may have a specific ACNT gene around. This is for me. So for me, one of the aha moments for me when I first looked at my DNA was I was doing Ironman racing at the time, so a lot of volume, but I responded to exercise with more inflammation than most people. We want some inflammation, the hormetic response. But when I saw that, I realized, I need lower volume because I respond more acutely. And when I backed off some of the volume, I started performing much better. So we would look at genetics and try to figure out the reason for that increased inflammation age.
It's fascinating. As I look at it, and it breaks it down. So for me, heart was one of the slowest aging at 42. Inflammation 45. Then it started to increase, brain, blood, lungs. And then metabolic, what goes into that metabolic test? That one had me really kind of right where I am, 49 and a half.
Yeah, and it's going to be correlated to similar things that we would test with your regular blood biomarkers. So, for example, if I'm looking at this, your heart being really low, your metabolic being higher, I would guess if we did like a clearly scanned AI guided CT angiogram, that we're going to find nothing in your vessels there, like really, really clean vessels and heart there. And then metabolic, maybe there's a little bit of elevation in your A1C, maybe a little bit of early insulin resistance or something like that. But those would be the kind of the markers that would most likely correlate with that.
And then the one that was highest for me was hormones. And so I was curious about this because since it's a blood test, especially with women, there's variation in that. So would that matter as far as like where the hormones are fluctuating, since the blood sometimes isn't the best representative showing the response in that?
Yeah. Women obviously vary throughout the cycle, and just depending on it, and even if they're postmenopausal, like just if they're taking hormone replacement therapy or not, and what the level and dose is for that. So yeah, the hormone one can move around a little bit more.
Probably more than the others.
Yeah.
So as we're looking at the symphony aging, I'm looking at the notes in it that it's taking about 130 biomarkers. And so are those also kind of looking at DNA, epigenetics? Is it looking at some of the things that we think of like a liver panel, or is it looking at these other markers that are more related to our DNA?
Yeah, so it's correlated with those kind of 130 biomarkers. So it's like the lab values that you normally expect. So like when Yale did this study, they would look at the biomarkers associated with liver function and then match up what the epigenetic pattern is, if those are high or low, older or younger. So that's how it was kind of developed. So we're not actually measuring those biomarkers. We're just finding kind of the epigenetic proxy for them.
And so that's sort of the same approach for all three of these tests. And then the results are distilled and communicated to us in the three different ways. One, breaking it down by organ system, one looking at simply, here's my biological age. And then the last, the pace of aging, the rate of aging being kind of the third, looking at those. Okay. It's all coming together. Y'all, also just for our listeners, when, Dr. Dawson and I talked for a little while before we even started, and I said, okay, this is one where I wrote out my questions even more than I normally would for an interview. Really kind of, it's been a little bit harder to wrap my head around because it's something that is so far out of the range of what we're used to seeing and learning and reports we're used to getting on ourselves. And just like Dr. Dawson said, also, a lot of times it's been questionable, and the validation of these results, like how much have they been vetted out, has also been questionable. So for me, this has also been just super helpful talking with you, kind of learning the foundation behind this. So we talked through those 3H tests. We talked through my results. We talked a bit too also about, validating the science and how you guys have done so, how the Harvard, Yale, Duke have the published research with all of this, I think is very exciting too, that's out there. And even like you said, a decade ago, this wouldn't have been possible. So now like y'all are truly on the cutting edge of sharing this with us. If someone we were looking at mine. So if it's me or if someone, when they learn their biological age, what actionable steps are kind of among the most common for someone to take to lower it? Or is it just all over the place, or are there certain things that you're kind of seeing more often that we could share with people to focus on?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll answer that in two different ways. If you are a wild health patient, for example, what you do to lower your age, we would tailor very specifically and personally to you based on your DNA and blood work and wearable data and all of that. So that's how we would approach it in a very personalized way. Let's say you're not a wild health patient, you just get this report, and what can I do? It's very clear the things that make the biggest difference in reducing this, and it's the things that you would expect. It's exercise, it's optimizing sleep, it's eating a kind of a whole food nutritional diet, stopping smoking, decreasing alcohol consumption, and then stress reduction. It is those things, and we all know that those are the things that lead to a healthier life. But then within Wild Health, we talk about personalizing those. What does that mean to eat a healthy diet for you? And what does it mean to exercise optimally? So, but those are the things that you would expect are definitely the ones that make the biggest difference.
And y'all, I shared with Dr. Dawson, kind of put an email. Here's some of the things about me, just so that he had no idea. And I'm like, he's about to walk through my results with me. And I even, felt kind of like, well, generally positive and seeing the humor in things. And we raise a pet duck and lots of community and social networks is strong. So all of those things were important for me to communicate to Dr. Dawson. I think I had even as much or more on the social aspects and the stress and sort of mindset as I did I had maybe a short little blurb on nutrition and movement. Here's what I do on these things. And then here's the other aspect that really affects our stress levels. And, I think it's the level of, we talked earlier about when we're under, extreme stress or extreme pressure and how that can accelerate aging. I think we have so much focus that we put on nutrition, we put on physical movement, which is both of those obviously are incredibly important. It's tremendous, but I think so many times we don't have that other element of it, whether it's sleep and or how we handle stress, what our outlook is, that positivity mindset versus the, poor me or why does this happen type mindset. So I think there's all of those things are in there. So anyway, I was wanted to be sure you were versed in that before we talked with me.
Well, and you're right to stress those things. Like I'll double down on that. The biggest study of longevity and health and happiness ever was the Harvard study on adult aging, and it was decades long, over 1,000 people. And the thing that they found made the biggest difference in how long you live, your health span, and your happiness was not smoking, alcohol consumption, obesity. It was the strength of your social relationships and connection. It was more important than cigarette smoking, which we know takes 10 years off your life. And so every time when I'm talking to people, people always want to know the latest biohack and what molecule is going to decrease your age and all that. And it's not even close. Like connection and social relationship are by far the number one thing. So I'm glad you made that point.
It's a game changer for people. So we'll have all the information and linking to TruDiagnostic site and the TruAge testing. But if someone can't afford it, what are other things that they could do, or either markers that they could check? What are some of the things that you would say? Okay, if you're not doing this, by the way, it'd be a great holiday gift to request. If you're into this and you're like, this is the time to treat yourself for this, could be a little holiday treat. But what are other things that someone could do if it's not TruAge?
Sure. Yeah. So it's a great overall kind of global marker and integrated of all of it. I would say if you're on an extreme budget, first off, I would just do the things we talked about. Focus on social, your relationships and connections and all of that, and sleep, like you mentioned. If you really want to measure something, though, if I had to break it down into like the least expensive, most impactful, and just kind of name two, just to really keep it simple, it would be your hemoglobin A1C and your ApoB. Now, the reason I say those is because the number one killer of Americans is going to be cardiovascular disease. So that ApoB is a really nice marker of the cholesterol that you want to bring down. A lower ApoB is good. And then I said hemoglobin A1C because metabolic disease is a massive driver of all those chronic diseases, dementia, cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke, cancer, all of these things. So optimizing your hemoglobin A1C. You certainly could check a CRP too, because we know how important inflammation is. The CRP bounces around.
Yeah.
So if you're just getting a spot marker, I don't know how great that is. But if you really pressed on lowering your ApoB and hemoglobin A1C, because those are just such cheap markers as well, I think those would be kind of the two to measure. I mean, Wild Health, we measure like 200. So I hate it's like asking me to pick my favorite kids. But those would be the two really cheap, really simple ones.
I think people are familiar with the hemoglobin A1C. You know, it gives a marker of longer term glucose control is kind of a simple way to say it. But explain to people what ApoB is. I just recently had mine done, but it's not something that I don't know how common it is that it's happening when someone's having their lipids done.
Yeah. And the reason why I say ApoB is because if people get regular cholesterol panels, they can be confusing. Like just the total cholesterol number is almost meaningless to me. And then even the LDL you get is it's a calculated measure. And even if you get like an NMR lipid profile with all the LDLP and all the others, it can be difficult to interpret all of it. So that's why I like ApoB. It's found in low density lipoproteins and VLDLs and ILDLs. But it's just like a one simple thing that we pretty much want it always lower. That's why it's a nice one to measure. And it's not a part of the normal lipid panels in general, but I think if you order from LabCorp, have your doctor add it on, I think it's like a $5 to $10 test. It's not an expensive test to get.
And so for our listeners, that would be something that would be like the kind of an addendum to your typical lipid profile. And so it's one component of LDL and VLDL and other elements of it. And so for me personally, I'm actually going to be doing a podcast on it in a couple of months. Is my LDL is high, and again, nutrition aside, it's stayed high. And so we've really kind of drilled down to see what some of these other markers are and to what level do we need to be concerned. So ApoB and hemoglobin A1C, and then just as we're wrapping up, as this is evolving, what do you see next on the horizon for us to be on the lookout for, as consumers of what's next? For a lot of us, this is what's next. We haven't even gotten here yet. And so to really kind of immerse in it.
Yeah, so that's a very clear answer. And I'm glad you asked. So with epigenetics and DNA methylation, looking at these million gene sites and what's turned up and down, from that, you can impute an incredible amount of information. So not just your biologic age or pace of aging, but we just finished a new study with Harvard. It's not been released yet, but we'll put a pre-pub out in the next few weeks, where we found that actually you can predict things like ApoB, like CRP, like these other lab markers, just from gene expression. So a few years ago, there was a study where they found that you could predict someone's CRP through these epigenetics. And that CRP marker actually did better at predicting disease than the traditional kind of LabCorp CRP marker. So that's very interesting because it seems that we're measuring the biologic effect of CRP, not just a random spot CRP. So in this new study with Harvard, we wanted to see, well, are there other biomarkers that actually perform better with their hazard ratio of disease than the traditional ones? We thought maybe we'd find a few dozen. We found 1,600. So we'll be putting out a new product in a few months that actually will be able to tell you your vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, omega-3, like all of this stuff through the epigenetics and DNA methylation with biomarkers that perform better than the standard versions when it comes to predicting disease, which is why you would do a test. So what you can predict with epigenetics and DNA methylation is limited by your imagination and the size of the data set. That's it. So we're coming out with some really cool products that replace an incredible number of other biomarkers just in the next few months.
I can't wait. I'm going to drill down even further into my report. I'm also going to check out Wild Health, the other company, the precision medicine company that Dr. Dawson talked about. And I've got to ask you, what is your biological age in each of these categories? Your omic M, where mine's 4 years younger. What is yours?
It's funny. Like I only pay attention to the pace.
Okay.
I literally can't remember what my ohmic MH was because it's not important to me because it's the pace. My last pace was 0.81. But it's
Okay.
bounced around. It's been, it's been as high as 0.92 different. And I test like probably once a month because I'm always doing rapamycin or some new senolytic or other things. But my last one was 0.81.
What's the lowest it's been, your pace?
I think 0.79 was the lowest it's been. And I've had patients as low as kind of 0.67, I think is the lowest that I've seen.
So we've got goals.
Yeah, a lot of it is genetically driven. And so the 0.83 that you have is like in the 98%. It's a really incredible score. The people that I see with the really low ones think there's a big genetic component too. There's only so much you can do.
Right. No, that's really, really cool. All right. So thank you so much for this. It's just a fascinating field. There's so much evolving that's so quickly. I know I had a lot of questions. A lot of those have been cleared up. I've learned so much. I know that our listeners have too. So I really appreciate you taking the time with us.
Thank you, Molly. It was a lot of fun.
Such a fascinating conversation with Dr. Dawson. This is something that I've had a lot of questions about. I'm sure if it's something that you've been hearing about or kind of reading a little bit here and there about biological age versus chronological age, it just seems kind of like this sort of murky gray area. And how do we know what's legitimate and what's really based in science? And so the universities, the research organizations that they're affiliated with, I really appreciate that. And I also really appreciate the clarity and the simplicity with which he takes something that's a very complex topic and really distills it down so that we can wrap our heads around it a little bit better. Also grateful that the TruDiagnostic company is offering us 20% off for our listeners. Again, no financial affiliation. They're not sponsoring this podcast, this episode, but they are offering our listeners 20% off of the test using promo code FUELED at checkout. I'll include the links that we talked about, including the link for the True Age test in the show notes of this episode. As always, let me know what you think. And if you take the test, you do this version or other versions of biological age markers, and you're learning and you're finding new things that you want to share that would be helpful or insightful for us to share with all of our listeners, let me know. I always want to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com. You can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.